ladies and gentlemen, Jochem Berg.
Thank you. Wow. So thank you very much for having me. They're still bringing up my lines, so I'll just improvise my way through the first part. So I was asked to talk about satire and how we work. I was asked to talk about maybe fake news or post-truth. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. So people ask me a lot about fake news ever since probably November last year. This term has sort of become mainstream. And how many people know the spelled here? Oh, that makes my life a whole lot easier. Thanks. I've actually kind of refused to talk about fake news in the media because people tend to think that, oh, the spell is fake news. On the surface, sure, it is, might look like fake news, but fake news is actually quite different. Fake news is actually designed to mislead the reader for financial purposes, for clicks and advertising revenue, or for political propaganda, like, I don't know, Russian propaganda, anything, something like that. It's actually designed to sort of work for powerful and authoritarian institutions. Satire does the exact opposite. Satire is actually designed to has a commentating function and is designed to question power. And it's not designed to mislead. It simply uses fictional techniques to question all these things. So that's for that reason. I don't like fake news. Is this my clicker? Where's the clicker? Great, thanks. You have this? Yes, this is one example of fake news. So there's no inherent value in fake news. It's just like trying to make you believe this stuff. There's no commentating function on, engaging function on society and all that stuff. So for that reason, I kind of skipped that whole topic for the rest of my speech. I just wanted to touch on it real quickly. And I just like this quote by The Guardian, if you're going to read really hyped up stuff, you'll probably find it in the mainstream media as well. But I did want to talk a little bit about facts and satire, because facts actually do have a very prominent role in fictional satire. And one of the examples that I wanted to use was Jonathan Swift. Jonathan Swift was a clergyman, but also a writer and satirist, early 18th century in Dublin. And he wrote a very famous satirical essay. It was called A Modest Proposal. And in this time in early 18th century Dublin, there was extreme poverty, and Jonathan Swift wanted to talk about the attitudes of the rich towards the poor. And in this essay, he made a famous proposal for the poor to sacrifice their children for the rich to eat. And it was a very, obviously people thought it was true, it was very controversial. But one of the reasons why I always use this example is because it's so well written and it's extremely factual. He will go into how much does a baby weigh, how much food can you get out of a baby, all that kind of stuff. What merit is it to society if we lose these babies? How much does society gain by eating the babies of the poor? And The reason why I use this example is because we in our work spend actually a lot of time trying to make sure that it's actually factually correct. Like a modest proposal is a fictional angle. Obviously, you know, you're not going to eat the babies, but in the internal logic, it's actually very factual. You want to make sure that that actually works on that level. And if we write about politics, we make sure that those numbers are actually correct. And a lot of that comes from this tradition that Jonathan Swift set. So it was like this quote of this, a good fat child, like it really rings a bell. So that was one example of like how it has a fictional thrust, satire. It basically functions like if you were writing a fictional novel. You might not be working on a journalistic level in that sense, but you're trying to get to sort of a deeper truth, and within that framework, you're trying to be as precise as possible, and you're trying to get all the facts straight. There was another source of inspiration that I wanted to share with you guys, and his name is George Carlin, and he was a comedian who recently passed away. Some recognition here. And I wanted to use him because when we're talking about the precision and language as social commentary, he's a very big source of inspiration for me and colleagues alike. So we're going to look at a video where he's talking about Modern Man, it's called, and it's about language that modern people use. I hope this works.
Thank you. I'm a modern man, a man for the millennium, digital and smoke-free, a diversified, multicultural, postmodern deconstructionist, politically, anatomically, and ecologically incorrect. I've been uplinked and downloaded, I've been inputted and outsourced. I know the upside of downsizing, I know the downside of upgrading. I'm a high-tech lowlife, a cutting-edge, state-of-the-art, bi-coastal multitasker, and I can give you a gigabyte in a nanosecond. I'm new wave, but I'm old school, and my inner child is outward bound. I'm a hot-wired, heat-seeking, warm-hearted, cool customer, voice-activated and biodegradable. I interface with my database. My database is in cyberspace, so I'm interactive, I'm hyperactive, and from time to time, I'm radioactive. Behind the 8 ball, ahead of the curve, riding the wave, dodging the bullet, pushing the envelope. I'm on point, on task, on message, and off drugs. I got no need for coke and speed. I got no urge to binge and purge. I'm in the moment, on the edge, over the top, but under the radar. A high-concept, low-profile, medium-range ballistic missionary. A streetwise smart bomb. A Top Gun bottom feeder. I wear power ties, I tell power lies, I take power naps, I run victory laps. I'm a totally ongoing Bigfoot slam dunk rainmaker with a proactive outreach. A raging workaholic. A working rageaholic. Out of rehab and in denial. I got a personal trainer, a personal shopper, a personal assistant, and a personal agenda. You can't shut me up. You can't dumb me down, because I'm tireless and I'm wireless. I'm an alpha male on beta blockers. I'm a non-believer and an overachiever, laid back but fashion forward, up front, down home, low rent, high maintenance, supersized, long-lasting, high-definition, fast-acting, oven-ready, and built to last. I'm a hands-on, foot-loose, knee-jerk head case, prematurely post-traumatic, and I have a love child who sends me hate mail. But I'm feeling, I'm caring, I'm healing, I'm sharing. A supportive, bonding, nurturing primary caregiver. My output is down, but my income is up. I take a short position on the long bond, and my revenue stream has its own cash flow. I read junk mail, I eat junk food, I buy junk bonds, I watch trash sports. I'm gender-specific, capital-intensive, user-friendly, and lactose-intolerant. I like rough sex. I like rough sex. I like tough love. I use the F word in my email, and the software on my hard drive is hardcore, no soft porn. I bought a microwave at a mini mall. I bought a minivan at a mega store. I eat fast food in the slow lane. I'm toll-free, bite-sized, ready to wear, and I come in all sizes. A fully equipped, factory-authorized, hospital-tested, clinically proven, scientifically formulated medical miracle. I've been pre-washed, pre-cooked, preheated, pre-screened, pre-approved, pre-packaged, post-dated, freeze-dried, double-wrapped, vacuum-packed, and I have an unlimited broadband capacity. I'm a rude dude, but I'm the real deal. Lean and mean, cocked, locked, and ready to rock. Rough, tough, and hard to bluff. I take it slow, I go with the flow, I ride with the tide, I got glide in my stride. Driving and moving, sailing and spinning, jiving and grooving, wailing and winning. I don't snooze, so I don't lose. I keep the pedal to the metal and the rubber on the road. I party hardy, and lunchtime is crunch time. I'm hanging in, there ain't no doubt, and I'm hanging tough, over and out. Thank you.
Yeah, that's quite brilliant, right? Yeah, there's just like so much to love here. Like he's so specific, like the way he sort of analyzes all this language. It has like a sort of a poetic value, and it has sort of deeper analytical value, and it's just the way he performs it. I just love it. I wanted to talk a little bit about how satire has changed, you know, from the Jonathan Swift era up to now. Because in my opinion, you know, satire has really, it's really taken on a different role last 5, 10, maybe 15 years. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is, I'll translate this in a minute, is how satire, how society has grown like more hyperbolic. So language from politicians is very hyperbolic. Media has become very sort of hype driven. And when you produce satire, we started up around 2007, and we started noticing like things that we were making in 2009, 2010 would become reality in 2012 or 2013. And so one of our main like instruments as a satirist is obviously exaggeration or the hyperbole. And we found that it sort of started becoming a useless tool because politicians were doing the exact same thing. So if you're a satirist, it's very difficult to look at especially some of these populist leaders and the language that they use. You can't really go into overdrive from where they are. So it's been a sort of a strange process where you have to come from a different place to satirize these people in these situations. And I think that's also one of the reasons why, you know, for the reader, it's sometimes difficult to sort of gauge what is satire, what is fake news, and what is real news. And from my perspective, it's not like we're trying to mislead or anything. Actually, we're trying really hard to make sure that it's read as satire, but it's like reality like came closer to us, so we have to like find different ways in dealing with that. And then there's and this is, let me just translate this. So in terms of this hyperbolic language, it says hyperbolic Tuesday. Is it a wow, how do you translate this? Is it a Nazi rape of the freedom of speech? Experiment is supposed to save humanity. And it's just about how this type of language is used in Parliament these days. Another thing I wanted to touch upon is that, you know, in the West, let me see if that's right. In the West, power relations have really changed a lot the last decade. So, you know, maybe in the 80s or 90s, we would take politicians seriously, and then we would have comedians and satirists, and we would laugh at the comedians and satirists. But these days, it's quite the opposite. We laugh at comedians, or we laugh at politicians, and we take comedians very, very seriously. You see people laughing at Donald Trump, Sarah Palin, etc., and we take Jon Stewart very seriously. We take John Oliver very seriously these days. So there's been a really strange reversal in sort of institutions that we trust, and that I think generally started with Jon Stewart, who really sort of started targeting satire as a perspective on media and politics. It wasn't, we're just making jokes on television, we're being cynical. It was really coming from a perspective of maybe quite a liberal perspective, but it wanted to hold people accountable. And I think from the Bush era onward, the role of the satirist, especially in the States, really changed quite dramatically. And you can ask the question, like, how could this happen? How can we take comedians more seriously than politicians these days? And I'm not quite sure if I have a satisfactory answer for that, but I would argue a few things. And one is that where the media has tried to be neutral or objective, that has sort of an apparent downside. And then you can fall into this trap of false equivalence. And this was a major topic in the last US elections, where you had Clinton being reported on the same way that Trump was reported on, like he's bad, but she's bad too. And you had this sort of false equivalence going. And actually you start to believe it after a while. After a year of negative media for Clinton, you think, oh, they're both pretty bad. And comedians don't have this problem. They don't need to be neutral. They don't need to be objective. They can just call out what they're seeing and what their opinion is. And they're not sort of inhibited by these journalistic norms and techniques, so to speak. So that is one reason why I think satirists have gained a larger voice today as opposed to maybe 20, 30 years ago. Do we have another one? And another thing that I want to talk about when we're talking about power relations, that what's very interesting today is that 20, 30 years ago, comedians would come out, especially here in the Netherlands, and they would talk about The Hague, they would talk about politics, and that was their role as sort of court gesture. You want to question power, and where is that power? The power is in politics. But these days, it's not very clear where the power lies within each case or each context. Power has become sort of dispersed or decentralized, so to speak. And so when we're thinking up ideas as writers, it becomes a very interesting question, like, okay, so who's in the wrong here, and what is the outrage really about? And you get yourself into a sort of a position where sometimes you can be defending institutions of power. So this was an example. So this was, I think, last year, and Wilders was on trial for the freedom of speech thing, and he was attacking the court day in, day out for being prejudiced, so to speak. And so we found ourselves that we were actually defending institutions of the state, which is a very strange position to be in. It's not something that we do every day, but you find yourself sort of searching for each instance where the power is and how you can question that and how you can satirize that. And it's not so clear cut anymore as it was a while ago. And to follow up on that, I wanted to talk a little bit about satire in times of crisis, because I think it would make sort of an interesting case. I've got some few examples of other satirical publications like The Onion and Der Postillon, just to look at what happens in satire after a terrorist attack or something like that, because it's interesting to me because we've had so many horrible things that have happened, probably the last 5 years or so, that the satirist, there's really like a microscope turned to the satirist, like words really intensify and have more weight, and if you say the wrong thing, you will be sort of crucified for it. But it's also a time when maybe your work is more important than in normal times, because you can really sort of touch on something that other people maybe can't say, or something like that. So I've gathered just a few examples here. So here was an example of Der Postillon, and this was during the midst of sort of the refugee crisis. And maybe you remember there was a truck found with a lot of victims in it that couldn't breathe, and they died in the truck, and there was a lot of like upheaval over it. And they had this piece where it says, "Everything is all right again. Austria sinks truck in the Mediterranean Sea," and it was just sort of pointing towards this hypocritical thing, like there were people dying in the Mediterranean every day, and all of a sudden there was like this massive upheaval over how people in a truck are somehow more important, I guess. And I thought it was an interesting piece on it. This was a piece we did in the midst of that. So it says, hypocritical, Laura is crying over her dead grandmother, but you don't hear anything about other grandmothers. So every time something like horrible happens, and there are a lot of victims, especially terrorist attacks in the West, there's always people saying, well, look, there's people dying on that side of the planet each and every day. Why isn't there more media attention for that? And we sort of thought, well, I mean, in some sense, it's kind of logical that, your emotions can only bring you so far. So it's actually quite okay to be a little more affected by something that's closer to you. And the next case I want to talk about was Charlie Hebdo, which is an interesting one because it sort of affected satirists more directly than other attacks. So this is the piece that The Onion ran. So you have to imagine, like in the writer's room, when something like this happens, you can make a couple choices. You can do nothing and say, and not if you're going to publish other stuff, then you're basically ignoring what happens, which in my mind is even more disrespectful than actually running something that's actually about the tragedy, so to speak. So if you're gonna write something on that tragedy, it has to be spot on, otherwise you will be crucified for it. And you have a couple hours to come up with this, so it's very sort of high pressure cooking thinking. So this was the piece that The Onion ran the day of the Charlie Hebdo attacks. Sadly unclear whether this article will put lives at risk. And this is the piece that we ran that same day. No people killed by a satirical attack, and it was just basically, the piece was about how nobody ever got harmed by a satirical attack within history. Like the total casualties of satirical attacks was absolutely zero, and it was more like kind of like a statement type of thing. Like it wasn't even trying to be funny or anything. And I think people tend to overlook, like people think that satire necessarily has to be humorous, but sometimes it can just be a commentary on something. It doesn't necessarily have to be extremely funny. It can just say something that's important in my mind. So this was the day of the attacks, and this is the piece that the Postillon ran, which says something along the lines of that the Charlie Hebdo attack is in support for Islamists and Islam haters, which was basically, it's a fair point, but I really believe that's been made like 1,000 times. I don't think that this is the most original piece they could have ran, because I actually like their Postillon a lot. And then after that first day, there's sort of this aftermath, and you can kind of think about what really happened. And you can run maybe some more submerged pieces on this. But this, The Onion ran this, I think maybe a couple of days later. I think it kind of makes the same point as the first article does. Doesn't really hit like a next level in my mind. And this was the piece that we ran in the aftermath. So it goes on and on, like this is only like half the piece, like, and this, we made this piece because like after every attack, it seems to be run through a very sort of traditional pattern by now. Like you pretty much know who's going to say what they're going to say. Like it seems like almost like a patterns that you can follow. So we wrote this whole thing where you can just determine your position and you don't have to think about it anymore. And this was the piece that the Postillon made in the aftermath of Charlie Hebdo. And it says, the terrorists have won. We can't tell you whose hairy ass, which prophet has this hairy ass. And I really love this piece. It's like it kind of does something like it's dangerous to do it, but it's kind of the right way, and it's very funny. So I thought I would pull this piece out. I feel like it. I think because of the discourse in the aftermath of terrorist attacks, it's always, oh, we can't let the terrorists win. We have to continue with our way of life. So I think that's one aspect of it. And then obviously there's the thing where for a satirist to show or picture the prophet is not really done and can be dangerous. So I think this is like a pretty creative solution to that that puzzle. And this was a piece we ran last year because we had, I don't know how many attacks within a year. And you're trying to sort of gauge how you feel, and sort of you're trying to touch upon something that nobody's voicing yet. And I think there's only so much we can take in terms of how much tragedies we can really empathize with on the extreme level that the first one might have caused. And so I thought this was an interesting piece to sort of gauge this saturation, I guess, of of the amount of tragedy that we can gauge. So that was really the part about satire in crisis. So I'll end with, I wanted to say something about the meaning of satire in our society. It's hard to really quantify, I think, what
Jochem,
satire really means.
Just want to warn you, we sort of ran out of time already.
Okay,
Make your point.
just
Absolutely.
2 minutes.
Go ahead.
2
Yeah,
minutes.
no,
I'll be
absolutely.
done.
Yeah.
So it's hard to really quantify what satire really means to society, I think, because let's say for example, during the Trump campaign, I think every late night show and satirist just went full throttle opposing Trump, and he still got elected. And so you can argue whether how much effect it really has in terms of activism or campaigning, because quite disappointing, one might add, if we the influence of satirists in that sense. But I do think that it can activate people. I think, you know, a program like John Oliver does activate people to take action sometimes. But you have to, it is a scarce sort of value that satirists play with. I think it does play a heavy role in discourse today. I think every major Western country has a satirical platform like The Speld, like The Onion or The Postillon. And it's sort of a byproduct, I think, of the massive amounts of media that we have. So if you're reading this amount of news every day, it's kind of nice for satirists to play with that kind of discourse and sort of play with that type of language that filters the reality in that way. And I think that it can be a very effective tool in sort of criticizing frames and narratives. So we're now we're into this frame of populist rise, the elites, the establishment, and I think if you look at all these satirical outlets now, they are sort of trying to criticize and undermine this frame. So I think it can be a very effective tool in criticizing discourse. I think the value in that sense is that if you have freedom of speech, make sure that your words matter, because they do. So I'll conclude with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.